Jesus responded to their request to teach them how to pray with these words. This then is how you should pray. Our Father who art in heaven. Now, I'm not going to go through each petition of the Lord's Prayer, but I do want us to stop and take a moment to look at how the Lord's Prayer begins. It starts with a form of address. Before we learn how to pray, we first need to know who we're praying to. When we write an email, we begin with the name of the person we're addressing. Jesus answers that question of who we are addressing in the first phrase of the Lord's Prayer. Jesus begins with the proper way he wants us to address God. He wants us to know who we are praying to in our prayers. Now notice, Jesus introduces this model prayer with a major paradigm shift. Something so extraordinary and different from anything that was previously known in thousands of years of Old Testament writings, that his enemies were furious with him. Jesus dares to call God his Father. How dare he claim to have an intimate relationship with God? The religious leaders of the day couldn't believe their ears. He's calling God Father. Now, keep in mind that when the Hebrew children were taught to pray, they were carefully instructed in the proper form of address to God from a very carefully prescribed list in order that God's name would be properly honored. Any form of personal address to God was noticeably absent from this list. Nowhere in the Old Testament, anywhere, do we find a Hebrew using the term Father as a direct form of address to God. Never. With one exception, a carpenter's son by the name of Jesus of Nazareth. In many of his public prayers, we hear Jesus approaching God with a personal form of address as Father. He used the term more than 70 times. In many cases, the first words of an infant Hebrew child, the first words they would speak were Mima and Abba, Mommy and Daddy. They're names of affection and intimacy. The word Abba is the Hebrew word Jesus uses in the Lord's Prayer when he said to pray, Our Father. Jesus is saying, when you pray, say, Daddy. God is not a God who is far away and distant and detached. He's near and close. This is what we call the immanent nature of God. He has come into our world to be known and touched. So in this model prayer, Jesus tells us to use the same childlike expression he used when he was growing up. When we come before God, call God Abba, Father, Daddy. Start your prayers this way, Jesus said. Think of God as a loving Father. Now, this is a wonderful concept and the whole point of the first two words of the Lord's Prayer. Jesus wants us to know how accessible and near God is to you and me. Sometimes we think God can't be bothered, but a father loves to hear the voice of his children. When my youngest son was little, he would crawl up into my lap to tell me something, and sometimes when I was distracted and not paying attention, he would take his little hands and grab each of my ears and dig his sharp little fingernails into the back of my ears and turn my face towards him to get my attention. Daddy, Daddy, look at me, listen to me. I never got tired of one of my children asking for my attention. I love to hear the voice of my children. I love to hear everything about their lives. I remember when our first son went off to college. We left him standing in front of his dorm. It was a long 6-hour drive home that seemed like it took forever. I felt a loss that seemed like a steak knife in my heart. When I got home, I waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. Then 3 days later, in the midst of some very demanding meetings and a difficult schedule, I got a call. I'd been ducking phone calls all day long, but when I saw it was him calling, I grabbed it immediately. I'll never forget how much I couldn't wait to hear his voice. Dad, Dad, it's me. My children always have direct access to me. I love to hear their voices. That's the way God feels about us. He loves to hear our voice. He loves it when we talk to him. He loves to listen. Every time we talk to God, hear him say to you, "It's so good to hear your voice. I missed you. There's no voice I'd rather hear in the whole world than your voice. Tell me everything." There's no sweeter voice to God than yours. Yes, you and me. We have favored status with God. He loves us to call him Father. This is why he doesn't want ceaseless babbling and mindless repetition, because he wants us. He loves to hear about our needs, our fears, our hopes, our prayers. He loves to hear our unique voice.